You going?
Yeah.
Okay. So we use hacer to talk about time. When you learned this in last semester, when you talked about the word ago, in Spanish, how do you say ago? Good. Right answer. The answer is you don't. You don't say ago in Spanish. There isn't really a way. Okay. The way that you say it is you say hace, and we'll just, for example, we'll say like 2 años. Que, and then we need some verb in the preterite, like fui a España. Okay. In English, this would be translated, I went to Spain 2 years ago. Which, if you look at that sentence, you're like, this is the craziest language ever, right? And if you look at your book, if you look at 367 in your book, it talks about if you're talking about the present, or the preterite, or the imperfect, and that sometimes it means since, and sometimes it means for, and if it's positive or negative sentence, and it gets really confusing if you look at it. That's not how I think about it, okay? So I'm going to tell you the way that I think about it, and hopefully this makes sense, okay? As with lots of things in Spanish, I always do like a weird sort of direct English translation in my head, which doesn't make any sense, except that it does make sense, okay? So I translate this as, it makes, right? Hace, because if we had the verb hacer, we would be down here. It makes, he, she, or it makes. It makes 2 years. And then sometimes this in my head sounds like that, and sometimes it is since, but it doesn't really matter. So I'd say it makes 2 years since I went to Spain. So it makes 2 years since I went to Spain, or it makes 2 years that I went to Spain. Either way, am I like, I don't know how, I wish that I were like a neurologist and I could say that this is activating like different parts of your brain or something, but I really think that if you can get this far, that your brain like intuitively will go, oh, I know what that means. It means 2 years ago I went to Spain, right? Are we okay so far? Okay, stop me if you're not okay. Yeah? So you will see that this is in the preterite, or this is in the present, and this is in the preterite. Okay? You can also say something like this. Hace 2 años que vivo en España. Okay? So let's do that weird like English translation thing again. It makes 2 years that I live in Spain. What do you think that means?
2 years ago I lived in Spain.
It makes 2 years that I live in Spain.
I have lived in Spain.
Meaning, I have lived, because this is in the present tense, but this thing being in the present tense, that's the kicker right there. That means it's still going on, right? It makes 2 years that I live in Spain, meaning I have been living in Spain for 2 years and continue to be living in Spain. Vivo, okay? So then what if I said the same thing, but I said hace 2 años que no vivo en España? It makes 2 years that I do not live in Spain. What do you think that means?
It's been 2 years lived in Spain for 2 years.
What's that? Say that one more time.
I have lived in Spain for 2 years.
I have not lived in Spain for 2 years.
So I've been home for 2 years.
Right. So it makes 2 years that I do not live in Spain, meaning I picture like some clock making time, right? This hacer 2 años. It's now, the clock has made 2 years since I have not been living in Spain. I am not living in Spain. Okay? You can also do it in the imperfect. So you can say, hacía 2 años que no vivía, or que vivía en España. We'll do that one first. Okay? How would we translate this now? Not it makes, but...
It made.
Not it made.
It was making.
It was making. So we'd say, it was making, so you can picture this like imaginary time maker thing, right? And it's making, it's like in the process of making 2 years that I was living in Spain. What do you think that means?
It's been almost 2 years since I've been living in Spain.
Okay, not quite, because now we're talking about the past, right? It was making 2 years since I was living in Spain.
It's been 2 years since I lived in Spain.
We use the imperfect to set up the background for a story.
2 years ago, I lived.
So you could be living somewhere else now, or.
So I had been living in Spain for 2 years.
Yeah.
Yes! Thank you! I had to been living in Spain for 2 years. It was making 2 years since I was living in Spain, right? So I was living in Spain, I'd been living in Spain for 2 years, and then it was snowing, and then it was raining, and then I was hungry, and then I met the love of my life, right? This is all background information stuff, hence the imperfect, right? It was making 2 years since I was living in Spain. So now what if I say que no vivía en España?
It had been 2 years since I had lived in Spain.
It had been 2 years since I had lived in Spain, meaning
You were living somewhere else.
you were living somewhere else, right? Because now you were not living in Spain. So you're living someplace else. So you could say, like, I had lived in Spain for 2 years, but then it had been 2 years since I had lived in Spain because I was living in Cedar City, and then I met the love of my life, or something like that, right? So when I think about it it makes 2 years since that I went to Spain. It makes 2 years that I live in Spain. So I just do this like little weird kind of English translation, and I think about some time maker thing that's like making time. And then in my brain, it makes sense. If you're fortunate enough, or if you're unfortunate enough to have a brain that's wired like mine, this will probably make more sense than the explanation that's in the book. Because you have to worry about, well, sometimes it means since, and sometimes it means for, and sometimes it's a positive thing, and sometimes it's a negative thing. I don't worry about any of that stuff. I just do this weird kind of translation thing in my head. And then I remember, if there is no, then it means this thing is still going on. If there is a no in front of it, then it means that thing is not going on anymore. Or if I'm talking about the past, if there is no, then that thing was still going on. If there is a no in front of it, then it means that thing was no longer going on. Do you have any questions? I see it. 1/4 of a hand. Are you gonna?
I lost the train of thought. I want to rephrase this. Give me a minute.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good. Okay, ready? Back by special request. Here we go. Here's your formula. If your hacer is in the present tense, right here. So no, you can. So if hacer is in the present tense, then your whatever your other verb is going to be in the if it's in the preterite. Let's see. I'm gonna have to really think about this. Okay, it can be in the preterite, or it can be in the present. That's an S. This is only for a positive statement. This would be for a positive or a negative statement. If it's in the imperfect, it has to be in the imperfect here, and that's for both a positive and a negative. How's that?
Golden.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does.
Oh, good. So this is what I'm saying. Because this to me is like totally worthless. Yeah. But that's what I mean. Like everybody learns in a different way, and so I can do this, and like maybe half of the class is like, oh my gosh, it's so clear. It's like a matrix. Like I can see everything, right? And the other half is like, this is bonkers. And then if I just do this thing, then the other half of the class is like, oh my gosh, why didn't I just do that the first time? So anyway.
See, because I understand